Yeah, I guess I just wanted to switch gears a little in the last few minutes, and think about, because I think there's like a natural tie-in, because what we've been talking about for the last few minutes is why you couldn't have the well, look, I mean, just like, put it this way, right? Like why there is a way forward for the sort of populism represented by the Krystal half of the rising, right? But it's much harder to see what that would look like to actually enact your co-host agenda, because there'd be no equivalent, right, social force there. And I think that a lot of people on the left, maybe like sort of, I mean, I guess I want to separate it out, because I think that like some of it is just dumb, but I think that but then like some of it, they're like, there's like a real issue there that, that we could talk about, right? So,
Yeah.
so the like dumb critique is, oh, you co-host a show with a conservative, so therefore you're like, I don't know, just pretending to be a leftist, or you secretly love Trump and Tucker Carlson or whatever, right? Like that's the dumb version. But then like and whatever. I mean, I think that we'd be much better off if there were a lot more shows, frankly, that were like co-hosted by like somebody who like, instead of doing the usual mainstream media thing where you have where you have somebody who's like barely a liberal, and then somebody who's who's this
A
like,
Bush Republican.
yeah, this like Bush Republican who represents like 2% of the population, that you had more places where people who were real leftists could reach an audience that they wouldn't reach if it were just them, right? So I think that makes perfect sense to me. But then I guess like the other half of it is like how to think of it in terms of like, obviously, in that role, right? Like, you're going to, I think, do things like tend to pick stories that like, where that like represent some sort of like area of mutual interest, like, which oftentimes, means economic stuff, and that makes perfect sense. But then like, I think that the danger that some people might see is then like the distinction ends up getting blurred, or or it ends up, or you end up not like, or like somebody could like, I think the worry that people have is like somebody could watch that and they just think, oh well, populism, whatever. It's all,
Right. It's all the same.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean, I hear those critiques and I take them in, and I really do, especially the ones that are, more thoughtful, as you put it. And I guess here's my thing. I feel right now that the country is absolutely breaking apart. If you ask people, something like 70% of Americans believe this election is going to end in violence. Some ridiculous percent believes that if their candidate doesn't win, that democracy will literally be over. And I think that the cable news media, this is like a little bit of a long answer, but
Yeah.
I buy into Matt Taibbi's
What do you
thesis
think? Yeah.
that cable news media has basically decided, since they don't have the Cold War anymore and the Islamic terrorism thing isn't working as well as like a national enemy, they've created our fellow citizens as the enemy, right? So it's no longer some scary outside threat. Now it's your neighbor. Now it's your friend. Now it's your cousin who has a different ideology than you. And obviously, being on the left, we see this really clearly from liberals who, Trump is literal Hitler. And if you support Trump, you're enabling Hitler and you're a Nazi enabler. I mean, just like the most vicious rhetoric, not just aimed at elites, which, listen, to me, go to town when it comes to elites, like pull no punches, all of that, but aimed at everyone who either voted for Trump or didn't vote for Hillary. That's 70% of the population, right?
Yeah.
That either didn't vote at all, voted for Trump, voted third party. And so if you're literally saying all of those people are out of bounds to even have a conversation with, I don't know how that you move forward as a country.
Yeah,
And
yeah, no, for sure. And I was just going to throw in there that,
yeah,
that I think that's a, also not only combined is that a majority of the population, right? But we're talking about a much more diverse group than people say in this often imagine. Like
Absolutely.
one
Yes,
thing, yeah,
absolutely. And so, there are some views that Saagar has that we have gotten into very ugly fights over, and that have, like, those times have been hard to deal with and confront and have that dialogue, which I think is reflective of an ugliness and messiness, frankly, that's happening in a lot of families and relationships across the country right now. And maybe this is hokey, but I just fundamentally don't believe in this idea of like, well, I know who the right moral actor is and who's good and who's bad. And if we push people out of the public sphere, that's the way to win and move forward. I don't think it works that way. I think you actually empower people by saying like, oh, this idea is so difficult and so dangerous. We can't even talk about it. We can't even talk to people who hold that idea. It makes it cooler and sexier than it deserves to be ultimately.
yeah, there are a lot of careers on the right that are entirely built on that.
Absolutely, 100%. So listen, everybody always talks about how you're creating a pipeline to the alt-right. What they never think about is how you build a bridge back.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not just me theorizing. I get the messages, I see the responses, because we have this space of dialogue where people who really profoundly disagree with me on certain things appreciate that at least I'm there for the dialogue. They listen to me and my views about maybe Donald Trump a lot more than they would, an MSNBC space or like a homogenous space where you just have all left views. So you actually create a space where you can persuade people and bring them over to some leftist views, to some more moderate views, some less disastrous, in my view, or cruel views. That space exists in Rising. And I think if you just have a monoculture and you just try to like push people out of the public sphere, I think it's incredibly counterproductive and doesn't ultimately lead you where you want to go. Look, we have to acknowledge reality as it exists. And a lot of the working class, predominantly the white working class, but actually the multiracial working class in general, has views that you and I would really disagree with and find very problematic. If our goal is a multiracial working class movement, we aren't going to get there if we're like, okay, well, these ones are evil, and so we're not dealing with you at all. We just want to pick and choose the parts of it that we're comfortable with. That's not going to lead anywhere ultimately.
Yeah, right. And I think like I will say, like, especially over the summer, which is when I think you probably had a lot of those most contentious conversations, right?
Yeah, about
Especially,
policing and protests. Yes.
yeah, absolutely, right. So I will, like, look, I'll say I often listen to the Joe Rogan show would, like, usually when I run, because like the all the other podcasts that I listen to, usually it's like hard to focus in that time, but like I think just kind of like listening to usually Rogan talking to some comedian or mixed martial arts guy, I can kind of do that, right? While I'm disoriented. But so over the summer I listened to the one that you guys did on there, and which was a time, right, when I think that Rogan's all over the place. This was one of the times that you had one of the takes I most vociferously disagree with,
Yes.
and I thought, like, listening to the way that you you did push back very hard, especially on the question of all the stuff that was going around at the time about sending the military, into cities to suppress the post George Floyd unrest. That I guess at a certain point, right? I wonder what a lot of the people who make this criticism want in that situation, right? Like, is the correct approach to just say, you guys are fascists, I'm not talking to you anymore, and literally just like end the Zoom call or whatever, right? Is it to scream at them, because if it's not one of those things, then I think it would have to be what you did, which was to which was like to push back hard, but in a way that is clearly about trying to persuade people who don't start from the same place, rather than like just telling them that they're bad people for having this view.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak in too broad terms, because I think there are people who are like, who really are thoughtful about these issues and have problems with rising and have expressed them, and like that's fine. That's their right to have those views. And I agree that it's kind of a complicated and complex issue. But I just think from a purely strategic point of view, if you want to make progress and you want to build a movement, increasingly like narrowing the scope of who you're even allowed to talk to or engage with is completely counterproductive. And unfortunately, on Twitter in particular, and social media in general, what is often rewarded is that kind of, it's very cheap and easy of like picking this fight and signaling that you're more pure and more left and more whatever than everybody else. And it's not actually about reaching a goal. There's no end goal in mind other than signaling your own personal virtue in this moment. And I think that has been deeply destructive, especially post Bernie, because Bernie was kind of this galvanizing force and kind of kept everybody on the same page. And after him, there's a little bit of a vacuum and a little bit of a free for all, and certainly a lot of like intra left squabbling, which, okay, fine, whatever. Sure. But I think that the instinct to signal personal virtue over any sort of strategic objective of how do we build a coalition that actually is going to win power and actually advance the issues and the ideals that we care about, that piece to me is what has been kind of most troubling about this time, because I just think bottom line is it's extraordinarily counterproductive and will destroy any hope of being able to build and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that, I think part of the issue is that I think a lot of people maybe like mix up two things they should keep separate, that it goes back to what you're saying about elites versus, your uncle,
right.
who voted for Trump, which is they'll say things like, oh, you can't convince these people, but it's really unclear what these people in that sentence is, right? Like, yeah. Is that Donald Trump? Is that Tucker Carlson? Or is that like,
every person who voted for Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And then like, I think the other part is that I wonder how much of this stuff is just kind of a hangover from, because like the emergence of some kind of like real social democratic left in the US is such a recent thing that like 5 years ago, well, actually 5 years ago, literally when Bernie Sanders announced that he was running for president, he announced it to like 10 people. And so it's this super recent development. And generally speaking, the like any kind of perspective to the left of liberalism has been super marginal in the United States for a very, very, very long time. And I think that in that marginality, like people get used to thinking of politics purely as like taking a stand, as a kind of like performance of moral dissent from whatever horrible stuff is going on. So like, I love Noam Chomsky, but like you read Chomsky, there's like never a place in any of that where he sort of pauses to be like, okay, well, what if there was like a socialist government that took power in the United States? How would it handle these issues? Because it would just never come up, right? Because he's being formed at a time when that's just, that would feel like such a like silly fantasy to like even bother with that. But then the problem is that when you do start to get some opportunities to to build a movement and maybe even take power, you still got that habit, right? That you think of politics primarily in terms of demonstrating your individual moral commitment, and that makes it really easy to then get into the habit. If that's all it is, right? Then like, oh, then instead of taking people who don't agree with you about everything, but like maybe are willing to support you, might have bad like cultural attitudes on some things, but like maybe they're even willing to put those aside for the sake of getting some of what they want, instead of saying, oh, good, right? Like that means like that you might win because more people support you. To have this instinct to say, well, okay, since what we're doing is we're exhibiting our moral commitment to opposing whatever's going on, then when new people show up, your impulse is to like interrogate whether they really have the right moral commitment, right? Like, are they really committed or enough or not? And if they aren't, then they don't get to be in the, they don't get to be in the club. They're not really.
And can I just say from a This is something I was thinking about today. I actually, hilariously, because of a Ken Bone tweet. I don't know if you followed this particular Ken Bone saga, but he tweeted that he supported Hillary in 16.
Ugh.
This time around, he decided to cast his ballot for Joe Jorgensen, okay, the
Mhm.
libertarian third party candidate. And he then followed up that with a tweet indicating that Trump people had all been really nice to him about his decision, and that liberals, I think in particular, had kind of lost their mind. You're a Nazi collaborator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he had this note at the end that was like, I don't think you all realize how much that reaction pushes people to the right.
Right.
And so that little gem of Ken Bone wisdom I've been sort of chewing on today. And it made me realize that, humans were not particularly rational, right?
Mm.
Most people, you and I have spent a lot of time thinking about like, this is where we stand on the issues, and this is my ideological framework, and this is how I think about the world. Like, most people are not doing that. And
Right.
that's not a knock on them. They're just like doing other things with their lives. And so a lot of what your views end up defaulting to is whatever club you feel you're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So, taking the Ken Bone example, in that moment, the people that made him feel welcome and like he was part of their club was the right. And so, if you're not a particularly ideologically formed person, if that's the group that is accepting you as part of their tribe and making you feel welcome, well, over time, guess what's going to happen?
Right.
You're going to start to see things their way. You're going to start to look at the world through this lens. Before you know it, you're a full-fledged right winger, right?
Right.
The same thing can happen on the left.
Mm-hmm.
If you make people feel welcome, if they're in the club and you kind of signal to them like we're all part of the same tribe, over time you will win them over. Like, their views will change to morph and to fit that ideological lens. If you are shutting the door on increasing numbers of people and explicitly telling them like, we don't want you, we think you're evil, we think you're irredeemable, we think you're doing all these horrible things, like the worst things you can think of, yeah, they're not going to agree with you. You're never going to win them over that way. And so in a lot of ways, it's just sort of human psychology and the way that we work, and we have to be,
Yeah. And
if
that,
we
and
want to
that,
build, we have to be
yeah.
realistic about those things.
Yeah, for sure. And that just seems like, put that way, right? That just seems so obvious. Yes, of course, most humans are going to react better to people who, are, making the hey, welcome, right?
Not being assholes to them.
yes, not being complete assholes to them, right? Then
Brilliance for the day.
yeah, for sure, right? And that sounds super obvious, but if you are around a lot of left-wing spaces, a lot of people certainly don't act like they believe that, right? Like and that they are really, really fixated on coming up with reasons to like make a negative moral judgment about like any given individual, even if it's if it's not like a decision maker. It's not it's Ken Bone, right? I mean, what's the, like you're talking literally about one person who you maybe sort of vaguely remember as a punchline from 2016, and he's just this like completely powerless random individual voter, but you're still coming up with reasons to morally condemn him.
Right. Right.
And it seems like a lot of that has to do with like, because I wondered about this a lot, right, over the summer, when there was that, that post George Floyd moment, that you would think would have that same kind of galvanizing effect you're talking about with Bernie Sanders earlier, that like would really like reorient a lot of people on the left towards like the high priority things, because hey, this is this like real issue. This is like literally a matter of life and death. But instead of that, you started to get a lot of focus on often like the pettiest possible symbolic victories.
Right.
And like literally, so there's like a military base that was named after was named after some terrible historical figure, and we're still going to have like planes that like fly out of it that that kill people abroad, but we're not going to name it that, and
You
so
have the right name on it. Yeah.
and I think that like a lot of that is, well, actually changing the way policing works would be incredibly difficult. It's a huge political lift. Whereas getting something's name changed, getting somebody fired, getting somebody pressuring some company just to say the right combination of words in the right order about Black lives, all that stuff is really easy and really winnable, because like those are things you can do that people will do for you, so that you'll like stop being mad at them and you'll move on
Right.
to the next case. And it seems like a lot of this stuff is that same impulse in this like really small scale, like, I can't actually, like, well, okay, you can yell at Donald Trump on Twitter, he just won't notice. But like, I can't do that. But this random person over here, right, I can let them know that they suck, and that might actually ruin their day. And that ends up feeling like some sort of miniature pseudo victory.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's really true. And I mean, and part of why obviously the protest movement collapsed to these more symbolic gestures is because not only are they easy, they're comfortable. They're
Right.
comfortable for like all the corporations who wanted to be involved and wanted, Amazon putting Black Lives Matter on their homepage and whatever. Like Jamie Dimon, remember that picture? Did you see that? Like kneeling in a bank
Oh
vault.
yeah.
I was like, oh no. Those things are comfortable, right? They don't actually challenge or threaten the bottom line of the people who run this country. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think that kind of translates into the Twitter space too, where in the absence of being able to win real victories, like this is a small way to have a sense of power. And I also want to say,
Mm,
I get it. Like,
right.
it is a very dangerous moment in American history. There's no
Mhm.
denying that. I mean, I feel this country is unraveling. It's spinning out of control between 2020, obviously, in particular. I mean, between the pandemic and the lockdowns and the loss of work and people being unable to pay their rent or their mortgage or their utility bills. I mean, I saw a story about the insane number of people who can't pay their electric and their water bills. I mean, all these things coming due. And meanwhile, because it's such a tremendously unequal recession where the top 20% is either completely unaffected or are actually doing better than they were before, the whole thing, all the pain is just like invisible to the people who have power. And so you have that layered on top of this incredibly fraught political moment where both sides feel like their literal lives are at stake in the election, like it is truly existential. And so the temperature is just turned up as hot as it possibly could be. And in that environment, I really think we should be cutting each other as much slack as we possibly can, even for things that I think are petty or silly or wrong or bad takes or whatever. Like, people are freaked out and they're depressed and they're sad and they're anxious and they're angry and they're fearful. And a lot of people are not at their best selves right now and not really thinking clearly about how we are going to be able to collectively move forward as a country. So, my policy is basically to try to cut people slack during this time and, try to see the best. It's so hokey, but it's really true. Like, try to see the best part of the person, as annoying or obnoxious as they may be, especially our fellow citizens, not like, again, the elites, like the people who have screwed this whole thing up, fuck them. But I get that it's a fraught time, and I understand why people have these very visceral reactions to viewpoints and people articulating viewpoints that they find abhorrent. Like, I really do get that. I just think ultimately that direction of discourse is not going to get us anywhere, but more of where we are today, which is a very ugly place.
Well, lots of people are not at their best selves right now, but that was great. Thank you so much for coming on, Krystal.
It's my pleasure, Ben. Thank you so much. It's great chatting with you.
All right, thanks.